The Orioles had the huge series win in Houston against the Astros, but unfortunately, with the bullpen exhausted, they couldn't complete the sweep on Wednesday as the Astros walked them off in the ninth inning. I'll recap the loss, plus talk about Ryan Mountcastle's trip to the injured list and preview the Guardians series coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fans, today is Thursday, September 21st, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap a tough Orioles loss as they fall 2-1 in 9 innings. The walk-off by the Astros, Mauricio Dubon. The Orioles fail to get the sweep, still pick up a huge series win, but drop Game 3 to the Astros on Wednesday. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including a dominant start from Kyle Bradish, a tired Orioles bullpen, and not a whole lot from the offense on the day for the O's. Then we'll talk about Baltimore's roster move from Wednesday, as finally, after missing 6 consecutive games, the Orioles have put Ryan Mountcastle on the injured list with a shoulder issue. We'll talk about who they recalled and who will fill in that role more so long-term now, as Mountcastle remains out of the Orioles lineup. And finally, we'll get you ready for a big 4-game set, Orioles and Guardians in Cleveland, as the O's look to maybe pull away a bit in the American League East. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we start today with an Orioles loss, and it was a tough one. Been a little while since the Orioles have been walked off on, but that happened on Wednesday afternoon. Final score from Minute Maid Park in Houston was the Houston Astros 2 and the Baltimore Orioles 1, as the O's, who had a 1-0 lead in the 8th inning, were not able to lock it down, not able to get the sweep. They do win the series, but they fall to 95-57 on the season. Now, as I record this here kind of early Wednesday evening, we have yet to see even first pitch from the Rays and the Angels. Of course, Rays took Game 1 on Tuesday, 6-2. If the Rays win, the Orioles' magic number will remain at 8, and the lead will be just a 1.5 games over Tampa. If the Angels can pick up a big win to help out the Orioles, the lead would remain at 2.5 games, and the Orioles' magic number would drop to 7. But either way, I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 2-1 loss to the Astros on Wednesday. And the first thing you need to know is Kyle Bradish, once again, was absolutely dominant against the Houston Astros. This is just becoming a thing for Bradish in his career. He goes 6 scoreless innings, allowing just 2 hits, striking out 9 with only 2 walks, 100 pitches on the dot, and maybe the most impressive thing, just 1 hard hit ball in 6 innings against Kyle Bradish. He was absolutely filthy in this game. And it honestly looked like early in this one, he was on pace for a huge strikeout day. I mean, 9 Ks is still amazing, but he had, I think, 6 Ks through his first 10 outs. I thought we were looking at a 13, 14 strikeout game, maybe for Kyle Bradish, but still, he was great. 18 whiffs on 44 swings. And that slider is the best pitch. By Stuff Plus, Kyle Bradish's slider is one of the best pitches in baseball. By Stuff, by run value in general, Kyle Bradish's slider is one of the best pitches in baseball. And I still think what we saw Wednesday was the best slider game Kyle Bradish has ever had. He threw 50 sliders. Count them. 50 sliders out of 100 pitches. I believe that was a career high on that pitch. Got 21 swings on that slider. 13 swings and misses out of 21. That is a ridiculous 62% whiff rate. 7 foul balls. Only 1 slider was put in play, and it was hit 77 miles per hour off the bat. He also had 7 called strikes on the pitch. It was just a swing and miss chase pitch all day against these Astros right-handed hitters. The curveball was good too. Got 4 whiffs on that one. And the sinker kind of became his get me over pitch. It was 9 called strikes on the sinker. It was in the zone. And he worked it like that against the Astros offense to get through 6 dominant scoreless innings. And he did a good job of getting himself out of jams. A leadoff walk and a wild pitch in the 5th. Had a runner on second with no outs. Gets the 0 with some big strikeouts. And then what he did in the 6th inning was one of the most impressive things I have seen from Kyle Bradish. He gets a huge strikeout of Jeremy Pena, or so it looks, to finish out that 6th inning with 6 scoreless at 95 pitches. Gets him to swing through a high slider. And then all of a sudden, the home plate umpire calls catcher's interference on the play and sends Pena to first instead of the strikeout. Now, they showed the replay. You never really saw the ball hit the mitt, yet the umpires reviewed it and confirmed the call. I couldn't believe it, of catcher's interference. Kyle Tucker was up next. Orioles leading 1-0, bottom of the 6th inning, 2 on, 2 out. Danny Coulombe, the lefty, ready in the bullpen. And Brandon Hyde comes out there and you're thinking, well, this makes sense. Tucker's the most dangerous hitter, a lefty, Bradish at 95 pitches. You got your best lefty ready. Here comes the change. But Brandon Hyde, what it looked like, went to the mound and basically said, do you want the ball to go get this guy? And it was kind of a heated exchange. And Bradish wanted the ball, and he stayed in the game. Got ahead of Tucker with a couple of nasty breaking balls, then got him to hit a soft line drive for the final out of the inning over at third base. What a gutsy performance from Kyle Bradish. It's unfortunate that the Orioles offense kind of wasted this start, but he was once again showing that he is the ace of this Orioles staff, and he was incredible on Wednesday afternoon. And that now makes 3 dominant starts for Bradish against the Astros in his career. 2 of them last year, 1 this year. In his 3 career starts against Houston, Bradish has thrown 22 and 2/3 innings. Think about that. 22 and 2/3 innings. That is over 7 innings per start against the Astros. No runs allowed to the Houston Astros last year and this year, the team that won the World Series last season. 22 and 2/3 scoreless. Only 6 hits. All 6 hits are singles. 25 strikeouts to 4 walks. An unbelievable line. Kyle Bradish, we can say it. He owns the Houston Astros. Second thing you need to know from the Orioles' 2-1 loss to the Astros on Wednesday is that I think the off day on Monday for Anthony Santander really helped out his bat, because Santander was not going good. He was mired in an 0-for-20 slump with 10 strikeouts. And because of that, Brandon Hyde gave him the day off on Monday. Now, he did pinch hit late in the game and was retired, but mostly got the day off from a lot of the pressures of the lineup. Return to the O's lineup on Tuesday, came up with a couple of hits, swung the bat well, and then was back in there Wednesday and really provided the only offense on the day for the Orioles. After a 1-out double from Adley Rutschman in the 1st inning against Christian Javier, Santander takes a low and away changeup, just grounds it through the left side for an RBI single that put the Orioles up 1-0. And then Santander also in the 6th inning came up with a leadoff double. Unfortunately, the Orioles couldn't rally, but he went 2 for 4 with a single, a double, an RBI, and 3 hard hit balls. Hopefully this means the Santander we know and love is back to help out the middle of this Orioles order. Third thing you need to know from this one, though, that was pretty much it for the offense. Anthony Santander. He was the only guy who had multiple hits in this one. Orioles had just the 1 run on 6 hits and drew only 2 walks in this game. The only other guy who reached base twice was Adley Rutschman, who went 1 for 3 with a double and a walk in this game. Otherwise, the Orioles didn't get much. I mean, I mentioned the 1st inning. They got the RBI single, and really the other best chance that they had in this game was in the 6th inning. Santander double deleted off. Then O'Hearn had an infield single, and it was 1st and 3rd with no outs against the Astros bullpen. They had gone to Hector Neris, who had kind of dominated the O's earlier in the series, and they just couldn't get it done. Cedric Mullins unfortunately hits a line drive right to Jose Altuve at second for the 1st out. Then Heston Kjerstad hits a fly ball to right field, but way too shallow to score Santander. And then Hayes grounds out, and they leave guys on 1st and 3rd with no outs. That ended up being big in this game because it wasn't going to take many runs to win this one, but you could just tell with the Orioles bullpen situation, they needed more than one. And the offense, it's been so hot in the last couple of games, they just weren't able to get that second big hit in this one. Fourth thing you need to know from this game, we'll talk about the bullpen in total in a little bit, but First, you got to know that we got the bad and the really bad Fuji in this one. We've seen some amazing outings from Shintaro Fujinami where he looks filthy. We've seen some bad outings from Shintaro Fujinami since the Orioles acquired him from the Athletics. You kind of, Jim Palmer called him the Forrest Gump pitcher because you never know what you're going to get. That's kind of been the case, but it was real bad on Wednesday, and Fuji was lucky to even get one out. Now, Brandon Hyde didn't have a lot of options, which we'll talk about, so he goes to Fuji in the bottom of the eighth with the Orioles leading 1-0, and it didn't seem like a terrible spot for him. Like, you got to go to him because he's available, but it was 8, 9, and 1 due up in the order, so you hope, okay, even if Fuji struggles a little bit, he can outstuff the 8 and 9 hitters and maybe get some outs. Well, unfortunately, Dusty Baker pinch hits Yordan Alvarez in the 8 spot, Alvarez who was on the bench for that game. Fuji walks him on 4 pitches that weren't particularly close. Then he faces what would have been the 9 hitter. Instead, John Singleton comes up to the plate. And Singleton, even though Fuji wasn't throwing strikes, helps him out big time by lining one to second for the first out. And then he faces Altuve, and once again, ball just wasn't close to the plate. So after 2 walks and the line out, Fuji comes out of the game. It did not look good. It was after he really did not look good on Monday when he allowed 3 runs. And it's interesting because before these 2 outings against the Astros, Fuji had 7 consecutive scoreless appearances to start September. It seemed like he was getting back into a groove. He had that awesome save in Anaheim against the Angels in that crazy game. We were trusting him more and more. And then he's kind of fallen off a cliff. And to be fair, the Astros, one of the best lineups in baseball. Maybe he can reset himself against Cleveland this weekend. But the O's are going to have to rely on him a little bit down the stretch, and it was not good. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 2-1 walk-off loss against the Astros Wednesday is that this Orioles bullpen was just tired. I mean, the amount of relievers they've had to use every single day. And remember, this was day 13 of 17 consecutive days of games without an off day. The Orioles don't get another off day until Monday. They still got 4 more games to play before they get an off day. And the bullpen was just shot. They basically used the entire bullpen on Sunday to get that crazy 11-inning win over the Rays. Then they essentially had to use most of the bullpen on Monday because nobody was really that effective for the O's until they came back with the Mullins homer in the 9th. And then they had to use 5 relievers on Tuesday, even though Jack Flaherty saved them with 2 innings out of the bullpen. Brandon Hyde did the right thing. He went to Cano in the 9th inning after Flaherty allowed the leadoff single. Cano got some outs, and then Perez comes in to lock things down against the middle of the order. You got to get the wins the day of. You can't be looking forward to that next day. And he felt like he had to use Cano and Perez for the 3rd straight day for the first time this season, and it worked out to get the win. And they got the series win, and that was huge. Unfortunately, what you sometimes give up when you go for that day's win as hard as possible is you give up the availability of your bullpen the next day. And sometimes that's okay, and I think in this situation, it was okay. The O's just didn't have it. I mean, Jacob Webb did throw a scoreless 7th, but he allowed 2 fly balls to the warning track and hit a batter. Wasn't the cleanest scoreless 7th inning. I mentioned Fuji. Mike Baumann then comes in the 8th. It was kind of a really tough decision for Hyde, whether he goes with Coulombe or Baumann there. They seemed to be his last 2 relievers that were even available in this game because Flaherty wasn't available, Cano wasn't available, Perez wasn't available, and Jorge Lopez was probably emergency only availability in this game. So we only had Baumann and Coulombe left. Baumann does give up the game-tying RBI double to Jeremy Pena, but somehow he loads the bases and works out of it, strikes out Bregman, and then Frazier makes that incredible play on the Abreu grounder to strand the bases loaded in the 8th. But the O's don't score in the 9th, and they go back out there, and they got to go to Danny Coulombe. And, I mean, I don't think it was bad. He allows a bloop double to Diaz to start the inning, then a ground out, then a little soft single through the right side for Mauricio Dubon that ends up being the walk-off winner. Only 6 pitches from Coulombe, and the Astros win it. And, of course, I wanted that game to go to extra innings, and maybe the O's can have a big inning with the zombie runner and make it easier for the bullpen. But I don't even know who the O's would have pitched in the bottom of the 10th. Like, maybe if Coulombe was efficient in the 9th, he would have pitched in the 10th. But if he wasn't, you're either throwing a kind of tired Jorge Lopez, who wasn't throwing very well, or that's kind of your only option. So, yeah, the bullpen was crazy tired. The O's somehow held on bullpen-wise Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, got 3 ginormous wins, and they broke a bit on Wednesday. Unfortunately, they don't have a lot of time to reset because they don't have the off days, but it's the combination of scoring 1 run and a tired bullpen ends up with an Orioles loss. They get the series win, but unable to get the sweep on Wednesday. But the Orioles got some other news before Wednesday's game as well. Finally, they decided to put Ryan Mountcastle on the injured list. So coming up next, we will talk about his shoulder issue, who they'll replace him with, and how it will affect the Orioles lineup a little more long-term, as we know he'll now be out for a little bit. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Now, we are coming down to the end of the Major League Baseball regular season. And these games are getting bigger and bigger. Orioles with a 6-game homestand against the Nats and the Red Sox next week. In one of those games, hopefully, they will clinch the AL East. And I know you want to be in attendance when they do that. But buying tickets to that game shouldn't be stressful. Well, Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the Orioles games you want to attend. Maybe you want to go to all 6 next week. Maybe you just want to wait until that magic number is 2 or 1 and try to get to the ballpark to see AL East clinchmas. And the best thing about Gametime, it makes it easy. You don't have to plan weeks or months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You could wait until the middle of the day on that clinchmas date potentially and say, you know what? Gametime's got a flash deal. Let me jump in there and get this good deal and head to Baltimore to, well, see the Orioles win this division. So snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Orioles fall in a tough one, 2-1 against the Astros on Wednesday, walked off by Mauricio Dubon. But before the game, got some more tough news. You know, since Ryan Mountcastle had left last Wednesday's game against the Cardinals early in the game with that shoulder issue, took a swing, was holding his shoulder, ended up walking, went to first, played a couple of innings in the field, and then the next time he was up in the third inning, Ramon Urias pinch hit for him. He left the game, and we haven't seen him in a game since. Now, right after that game last Wednesday, the Orioles got good news. The MRI looked clean. X-rays were clean. They felt like he was day-to-day and would be back soon. But then every day, it just felt like he wasn't any closer to coming back. And heading into Wednesday, Mountcastle had missed 6 consecutive games. And we were wondering, like, at what point does this shoulder issue put him on the injured list? Well, that point was on Wednesday. The Orioles finally announced that Ryan Mountcastle was being placed on the 10-day injured list with what they're calling left shoulder AC joint inflammation. I don't exactly know what that is, but I kind of know where the pain was, like right there for Ryan Mountcastle. He seemed to be flexing it right there a lot. So that seems to be the injury. Now, what I found out yesterday, which is interesting, you know how you can make an IL move retroactive? You can only push it back retroactively 3 days. So even though he hasn't played since last Wednesday, you can only retro to 3 days prior. So even though they put him on the 10-day IL on Wednesday, September 20th, it is retroactive to September 17th. So Mountcastle would be available to come off the IL next Wednesday, September 27th, which would be before the second game of the Nats series, the 5th to last game of the season for the Orioles. Now, Brandon Hyde said before the game Wednesday, he was somewhat confident that Mountcastle would be back and ready to go when the IL time is up. But it is a little concerning that the Orioles, thought at first after the initial testing that he was going to be good just day to day, and then it just strung out, and now he's on the injured list. Now, it was really good that they called up Heston Kjerstad when they did, because he's been helpful with Mountcastle out. But now we kind of try to figure out, what will the O's do without Mountcastle? And here's the other thing, right? Like, if he's not feeling good swinging the bat, they kept saying, he tries to swing, he's still feeling a little bit of pain. Can he even get back in the regular season? Like, even if he returns next Wednesday, there's only 5 games left in the year at that point. Can he really get back into a groove to be counted on in the playoffs? You would hope so, but there's a little twinge of doubt that maybe not. So the corresponding move was what we all thought was going to happen. Ryan McKenna is back up in the big leagues with the Orioles. I would be surprised if he starts any games up here. He's really here to be a defensive replacement in the outfield and a pinch runner. I mean, maybe he'll start one game against a left-handed starter, but that's about it. He'll mostly be coming off the bench as that 14th guy for the Orioles, especially with Mullins and Hicks healthy and Kjerstad here in the lineup. But it'll be interesting to see what they do without Mountcastle. Now, we've seen recently that against right-handed pitching, that you're just going to put Heston Kjerstad into the DH spot. And that's been great so far. I mean, Kjerstad swinging the bat well. Yes, he did have an 0 for 4 in Wednesday's game, but it kind of felt like who didn't in that Orioles lineup that scored 1 run. But Kjerstad's been good. He's had 9 batted balls, 9 balls put in play so far since the Orioles called him up last week. 7 of those balls have been hard hit. 7 of them have been hit 95 miles per hour or more off the bat. The 8th one was a single he had on Monday night in Houston that was 94.6, so just barely below an 8th hard hit ball. And the 9th one was his final out on Wednesday. It was the 9th inning. It was a 66 mile per hour soft liner that almost fell in over top of Alex Bregman for what would have been a huge leadoff single in the top of the 9th inning in a 1-1 game. Kjerstad's swinging the bat really well. He looks confident. He's got crazy good opposite field power. I don't know if I'm playing him every day, and I'm probably still sitting him against lefties. But against righties at this point, like maybe not every game, but most games, I'm totally fine with having Heston Kjerstad in there. Now, the question becomes, what do the O's do against the lefties without Mountcastle? Because if you remember, the Orioles have not seen a left-handed starter since Ryan Mountcastle left that game last Wednesday. Drew Rom, the lefty, was the starter in that game, and they put Ramon Arias in at first base. But against the Rays and the Astros, neither of those teams threw a left-handed starter against Baltimore. So we haven't seen them do it. And right now, looking at the Cleveland probables this weekend, they only have a probable starter right now for, it looks like, Friday and Saturday. They're both righties. Sunday could potentially be the lefty Logan Allen, so maybe we see then. But against right-handed batters, I mean, I'd put Kjerstad at DH, O'Hearn at first, and kind of the rest of your normal configuration out in the outfield and in the infield. Here's what I think they'll probably do against lefties. We'll probably continue to see Jorge Mateo at shortstop against lefties with Jordan Westburg at second and Gunnar Henderson at third. And then honestly, I know the O's have been trying to hide Ryan O'Hearn from left-handers, but with how great he's swinging the bat and without Ryan Mountcastle, I think I'd put Ryan O'Hearn at first base in the lineup against lefties. You just can't have his bat out of the lineup at any point now. Then you have Hayes in left. I'd still put Mullins in center, Hicks in right, and then you could DH Santander at that point. Now, if you really wanted to sit O'Hearn, you could maybe put McCann in there. You could put Arias at first base. You could maybe put Santander at first base and DH someone else like Ramon Arias, or even play Ryan McKenna and DH someone like Hicks or Hayes. Like, you have the possibilities there against the lefties, but you do lose a lefty crusher in Ryan Mountcastle. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I'm just hoping that the shoulder issue isn't too serious. And once he gets back, like, he'll be good to go. He'll ramp back up in that Red Sox series and he'll be ready for the postseason. But we shall see. Hopefully this rest can get it a lot better. But one more thing to get to on this podcast. Orioles don't have an off day today. They are right back into baseball. Orioles Guardians starting tonight in Cleveland, a 4-game series. Do a quick preview of that one to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Now, we know that MLB season is ready to hit the playoffs, but it's also NFL season. And you can snap into the action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Just log on there, and they got everything there you want. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So after the Orioles dropped the final game against the Astros, but did take 2 out of 3 from Houston, still trying to hold off the Tampa Bay Rays in the AL East. And the schedule now gets a whole lot easier for the Orioles. The Astros, I would say, the last good team they had on the schedule. Next up, it is the spiraling Cleveland Guardians. Orioles in Cleveland for 4 games starting tonight. This Guardians team now 72-81. They had kept their head above water last weekend, sweeping the Rangers and staying barely afloat in the AL Central race where they sit in second place. Then they had a series on the road against the Kansas City Royals, arguably the worst team in baseball. And you're thinking, all right, Cleveland could stay in the mix here. Well, this week, the Guardians were swept by the Royals, and their season is essentially over. Cleveland enters this 4-game series with the Orioles with their elimination number at 1, which means one more Guardians loss or Twins win eliminates the Guardians from AL Central contention. They've already been eliminated from wildcard contention, so their playoff chances are basically at 0 at this point. And that works out for the O's because not just is this Guardians team incredibly flawed, but they're basically going to have nothing to play for after game 1, hopefully, of this series. And that'll help out the O's because there's usually a little hangover, at least for a couple days, after you get officially eliminated from the postseason. Now, this is a Cleveland team that did win a series in Baltimore earlier this year. It was May 29th through the 31st. Cleveland went in, took 2 out of 3. That was the series where Cedric Mullins got injured. That was also the series, if you remember, right after the Orioles had demoted Grayson Rodriguez to AAA, and they didn't really have a plan to call up anyone else to make the start in his place. So instead, they threw a bullpen game in game 3 of that series and gave up 12 runs and lost the series. That was one of the low points, I think, on Orioles Twitter this year. That was the last time against Cleveland. Now, they don't have a lot going on. The offense is really, really bad. Last year, they hit a lot of singles. They stole bases, took the extra base, played small ball, and were really frustrating to face. This year, they still have no power, but they're just kind of bad. And for tonight's game, game 1, Grayson Rodriguez on the hill for the Orioles, coming off the dazzling 8 scoreless innings against the Rays over the weekend. We'll see if he can follow it up. Guardians have not yet named a starter for this one, but it is a 7 p.m. or 7:15 p.m. Eastern time start. It is on national TV. Tonight's game is on Fox, but you can still listen to every pitch of tonight's game 1 of the Orioles' hometown radio broadcast with the SXM app through SiriusXM. Just download the app and search Orioles. Now, the rest of the series, Friday, a 7:10 p.m. Eastern time start. Dean Kramer goes for the Orioles in that one, coming off a much, much better start against the Rays on Sunday after 2 tough ones in September. And for the Guardians, it's Shane Bieber returning to the mound off the injured list on Friday to pitch for the first time since July 9th. He had looked pretty good in his rehab in AAA, and Bieber, who has a 3.77 ERA and 117 innings this year, comes back to the mound to make basically 2 starts to finish off the season. One will be against Baltimore. He did pitch in Baltimore earlier this year, and he was awful in that one against the Orioles. 4 innings, 7 runs on 8 hits. His velocity's been way down this season. It's been a different Shane Bieber. Hopefully the O's can jump all over him on Friday. The Saturday game is a 6:10 p.m. Eastern time start. John Means will make his 3rd start back from the injured list after Tommy John surgery. And the Guardians will go with the right-hander Cal Quantrill in that one. Quantrill, who doesn't strike guys out, throws a lot of like cutters and sinkers and tries to get ground balls and soft contact, was really good doing that last year, has been really bad at that this year. 17 starts and a 5.26 ERA. Although he's been really good in September, he's kind of found his magic from last year. We'll see what he can do against the Orioles. And then the Sunday game is a 1:40 p.m. Eastern time start to finish it off. Kyle Gibson, the veteran, goes for the O's, and the Guardians have not yet named a starter for game 4 of that series. But it's a Guardians team that's pretty much out of it. You would hope the Orioles can go in and get 3 out of 4 on the road in this series. That's my hope. And continue to be in first place in the AL East, set themselves up to clinch at home sometime next week. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. I'll be back tomorrow for one final episode of the week, recapping game 1 between the Orioles and the Guardians. And we got some special baseball media guests coming on this podcast tomorrow. These are a couple of guys that I'm pretty sure you all are probably fans of. One of them is a big Orioles fan as well, and they are some fun podcast guests to have on. So that's the tease for tomorrow. Make sure to be here for tomorrow's episode. Little Orioles kind of early playoff preview on tomorrow's pod to finish the week. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.